a few more people to join us. All right, we have a few more coming in. So thank you all again so much for joining us today for another SGR Wednesday webinar. And thank you for those of you introducing yourself in the chat. Those of you who haven't had an opportunity, we'd love to hear from you in the chat where you're joining us from and anything else that you feel like you need to let us know today. We're so excited to have Randy Mayeux back again for another executive book briefing. And this week we are doing Extreme Ownership. And Randy, anything you want to say about the book before we actually get started with the book briefing?
Oh, I'm sure will. Yeah. So tell me when you're ready for me to start.
Awesome. And I also want to quickly introduce Kim, my colleague. She's in here somewhere. There you are, Kim. I just wanted to introduce her, and she does a lot of the work getting these set up, and of course works with a lot of you all. So it's always nice to get to say hello and check in with Kim. Okay, it looks like we have a pretty good group in. So I want to remind you all to use the chat feature to ask questions as we go. We'll get to as many of those as we can at the end, but I am not going to read Randy Mayeux's bio to you all because you've probably heard it a few times by now, but it's also available on our website, and I'm happy to drop that link as well. So I will turn it over to him so we can get started.
Well, good morning, everyone. Welcome to the webinar. This one is a book on leadership. It is the book on leadership of the last decade. And I'm going to do a couple of things to get started. I'm taking my headphones off it. And so, Krista, if you will just wave your arms and let me know you can still hear me okay. So you have disappeared. I don't see you. So I want to make sure you can hear me okay. All right, good. Let's talk for a few minutes about leadership practices and leadership books. And so what I want to say is that the evidence is crystal clear that good leaders keep working on their leadership, their knowledge, their skills, their understanding. And one of the ways they do this is to read books. One of the books that I presented a couple of years ago for an SGR audience was the book by General Mattis, and Call Sign Chaos is the name of that book. And that book, he talks about how, as a military leader, he would read books about battles that had been fought where he was stationed. So he would understand the terrain and the environment and the history of battles on that very spot. My wife and I went to Valley Forge in Pennsylvania in August of this year, and I remembered that thought from that book as we looked at Valley Forge, where General Washington's army wintered for the year, and that's where they were turned into an army by a man from Europe named von Steuben. So reading books, I read the book 1776 by David McCullough while we were on our vacation to Philadelphia. So I'm a fan of book reading. Now, obviously, here's the bad news. If you read a good book, you have to figure out how to implement it. So that's your job. It is my job, and Chris has said you know about me, but I have presented book briefings for SGR for well over, I think, 18 to 20 years now. And I've been doing book synopses, we call them that word in what the other arena of my life, at the First Friday Book Synopsis of Dallas. I have now prepared and presented synopses of over 630 books over the last nearly 27 years. Now, I'm going to pretend that you asked me this question, Randy, what are the best books on leadership? So Krista or somebody put that link up, put that image up on the screen. And I want to tell everybody that if you'll look in the chat, you will find this at this link. And this is a blog post I wrote on books on leadership. So we're waiting for that to appear on the screen. Here it comes. All right, let's go to the top of this. I wrote this back a while back, and I added, notice what it says at the top, update May 2023. I have a new, if you have time to read only one book on leadership, read this book recommendation. And it's The Wisdom of the Bullfrog, Leadership Made Simple But Not Easy by Admiral McRaven. The Bullfrog is the longest serving Navy SEAL. And it was in the earlier version when it was named Bullfrog. And so that book I presented in this webinar series back in February. Now scroll down, Krissa, and what I want you to notice, and by the way, there's a link to another list of books, keep scrolling, is that this book, all right, let's a little bit more. No, up, down, yeah, no, that's it right there. All right, this book, Extreme Ownership, is the book that we're going to do today that I have presented more than any other book on leadership. It was published in 2015, and it is currently in the top 10 business bestsellers list this month on the New York Times business bestsellers list. It has been there 6 months out of the year ever since it was published. It is a really big best-selling book, and I'll introduce the authors to you in a minute. And then if you just kind of look at this post, The Making of a Manager, this is the basic manager book, Radical Candor by Kim Scott, where she says the formula is to care personally and then challenge directly. Keep scrolling down. And then you've got Brene Brown, Dare to Lead, which is about the leadership with vulnerability and transparency. This is kind of a classic. It is also on this month's business bestsellers list of the New York Times and has been there off and on since it was published a few years ago. Scroll down further to the long list. Keep going. And so here's kind of a list of, if I were building a reading list for leadership, these are the books I would put on it. Encouraging the Heart, Kouzes and Posner. Mike Mowry says that this is the second best book that Kouzes and Posner wrote, but he's wrong about that. It's the best book. Anyway, that would be kind of an early book in my reading stack. And then Multipliers, How the Best Leaders Make Everyone Smarter, and Mindset by Carol Dweck on the growth mindset instead of the fixed mindset. 11 Rings, that's by the great basketball coach Phil Jackson. Here's the Call Sign Chaos book by General Jim Mattis. There's The Making of a Manager again. Keep scrolling down a little. Team of Teams, which is by General Stanley McChrystal. Drop down to, there's Great by Choice, which is in my view, better book by Jim Collins, better than Good to Great. And so that's my personal bias. And so there's that. But I skipped over Creativity, Inc., Overcoming the Unseen Forces That Stand in the Way of True Inspiration. I was assigned that book to prepare it for the city of Frisco, Texas, years ago. And this book is written by Ed Catmull, who was the head of Pixar. And there's a reason to recommend this book. Other than the brilliance of his leadership at Pixar, it's kind of a third biography, not really a biography, but enough stories in it to count, a third biography of Steve Jobs. And if we had time and we were having a cup of coffee, which I wouldn't drink, I'd drink a Coke Zero Sugar. If we were having a visit, I would tell you that Ed Catmull may have saved Steve Jobs as a leader. So that is a terrific book. So anyway, that's the link. I've got the link in the chat, and you can now take that off the screen, Krissa. But that is my suggested list of books for your reading list. And so hope you find that useful. And now let me spotlight myself, and here we go. Extreme Ownership, How U.S. Navy SEALs Lead and Win. When Mike Mowry and I were talking about the books to present, in this series. This book is what I'm going to call a leadership classic. So we came back to this book, even though I presented it for many city governments, many executive leadership teams, many companies on my own. This is the book that we ought to revisit. And the title says the reason. If you're the leader, you own the results of what it is you're doing. It is on you, on nobody else. You can't blame the people above you if you're the leader of a team. It is your job to lead that team. And you can't blame the members of the team. It is your job to lead that team and make sure they produce the results. A couple of things about the word SEAL, and then also Jocko, Willink, and Leif Babin. The word SEAL, as you will notice, is always capitalized right there, SEALS. It is not a word, it's an acronym, and it stands for sea, air, and land. And so a Navy SEAL is trained to go out on the mission on the sea, in the air, on the land. And in this book, Jocko Willink and Leif Babin write about their experience learning to be Navy SEALs, leading Navy SEAL teams, and then how they translated that into the private sector after they retired from the Navy SEALs. Now, I do this a lot, and I apologize, but turn all the way to page 8 in the handout. Page 8 in the handout. And so on the right, 2 former SEALs take us through their SEAL training and then their experience in Iraq in the Battle of Ramadi, sharing lessons learned along the way. And then they translate these lessons into the business arena or the organizational arena. So this is a valuable book about leadership, problem identification, and problem solving. Take your pen and circle the phrase problem identification. I'm a big fan of paying attention to that task because we've got too many times people propose solutions where they have not adequately identified the exact problem. And a solution that is not connected to a specific defined problem is not going to work. So you've got to identify the problem and then offer a solution. And then the book is also plenty about teams. So on the left side of the page, Jocko Willink and Leif Babin, 2 successful former Navy SEALs. They were in SEAL Task Unit Bruiser with leadership roles in the Battle of Ramadi. I really always call attention to this paragraph right here. These are great stories, but vetted and allowed. And what they mean by that, let me read it. The manuscript was submitted and approved through the Pentagon security review process in accordance with U.S. Department of Defense requirements. There have been some former military people, including Navy SEALs, who have written books and revealed things that should have never been revealed. That did not happen in this book. They put it through the paces with the Pentagon, and they were given permission to print this. I like the integrity of that. And then there's an inventive, unique structure to this book. Within each chapter, there are 3 subsections. The first identifies a leadership lesson learned through our U.S. Navy SEAL experience. I'm reading here, and this is in italics, which means it's right from the book. And the second subsection explains that leadership principle. And the third demonstrates the principle's reapplication to the organization or business world based on our work with a multitude of companies in a broad range of industries. These 2 authors and their company have been hired by many people. Now, some stories. these stories reveal some insightful stances and practices of the Navy SEALs. The first story, the two boat crews and the swapped out leaders. All right, here's the story. In Navy SEAL training down in Southern California, San Diego area, they've got this place where the Navy SEAL teams line up in a competition. They've got all the SEAL teams lined up in a competition. When the signal is given, they run to the beach, pick up a raft that is heavy, awkward, and bulky, take it out into the water, start rowing on the raft out to a marker in the water, circle the marker, run back, pick up the raft, and carry it to the finish line. It is an exhausting experience. They have to run, they have to carry, they have to row, and they have to do it flat out. Here's the practice. This is fascinating. There are multiple Navy SEAL teams competing. The winning team gets to sit down and relax, and the remaining teams have a second race. The winner of the second race gets to sit down and relax, and the remaining teams have a third race until they end up with only the final two teams, and those two race. And so you end up with an actual winner at the beginning and an actual loser at the end. And they repeat this day after day. All right. So after a few days, in one session of competition, what had happened was the same team won first place every day. And the same team won last place, or not won it, but ended up in last place every day. So that's what happened. So Jocko Willink is second in charge at this, and the guy in charge says to Jocko, let's try something. So they called over the leaders of the two teams, the best team and the worst team. They called them over and they said, switch teams. So now the leader of the worst team becomes the leader of the best team. And the leader of the best team becomes the leader of the worst team. And then they go out and compete. All right, I'm going to pause a minute. I want you in your mind to figure out what happened next. Pause about it. Think about it. Most people say that the last team ends up coming in first with the new leader. That's not correct. The last team comes in second. The team that had won every day continued to come in first, but the last team moved up to second. So why? All right, here's what happened. The leader of the first place team would sit in the front of the raft. He would row every bit as hard as every team member. He would really put his all into it, but he would do it glancing over his shoulder, observing and shouting out instructions. Where the leader of the last team would sit in the back and he would take it easy and he would row a little bit and he would simply shout instructions. Well, when they changed, the best team with the best leader had learned what to do and they just kept it up. They ignored this new leader who didn't do it right. Whereas the leader of the best team moved to last, moved to the front of the raft, did the same thing, gave them what they needed, and they came in second. So all sorts of principles there. Number one, you show what needs to be done. You lead from the beginning, from the front. You demonstrate, but you observe and you give instructions. So that's the story of the two boat crews and the swapped out leaders. I love that story. Now, the second story here, the misidentified building number and the near catastrophe. They're in Iraq. Jocko Willink is in charge of a Navy SEAL team. They are out in the city, and it's a city without modern day addresses painted on the curb. It's a street where there are no numbers, and they are looking for a sniper, a bad guy sniper that has been killing people. So they're looking for it. So they've got a Navy SEAL team, and now Jocko Willink and the SEAL sniper climb up to the roof. And so what's happening is Willink is on some kind of communication device back with headquarters. They've got satellite photos. They're saying, we have narrowed it down. And so Jocko Willink gives the order to the sniper, take out the guy in that window over there. They're huddled down on the roof behind a parapet or whatever that's called. And so the sniper takes aim, gets ready to pull the trigger, turns to Jocko Willink and said, no, sir, I don't feel right about that. I'm not sure that's the bad guy. And so Willink calls back to headquarters. They check again. They double check the parameters. They double check the photographs, and they call back and say, this is an order, have him take him out. That's the bad guy. And so the sniper gets the order from Jocko. Jocko is his immediate commander. He takes aim, gets ready to shoot, puts the rifle down, said, no, sir, I don't believe that's right. I don't think that's the bad guy. So Jocko calls back, and they do a third check. And now they're getting frustrated at headquarters, and they say to Jocko, we are certain that's the guy. Take him out. And the sniper aims, easy shot. He could have taken him. He's a great sniper. By the way, the sniper's name was Chris Kyle, the best sniper we ever had. You may know the movie about Chris Kyle. So anyway, Chris Kyle takes aim, puts the rifle down, and said, no, sir, I know I'm disobeying an order, but I will not do it. At that point, Jocko Willink calls back and said, he is not willing to take the shot. So now you've got a discipline problem. But they decide to check in a different way and discover that the guy he was about to shoot was what they call a friendly on our side. And so what happened was Chris Kyle had the experience to sense something was wrong. Jocko Willink trusted Chris Kyle, and he put his own reputation at risk and Chris Kyle's with headquarters refusing to obey the order. But it turned out that it was right. So on a team, you have to have expertise and trust your people. All right, the next story, the very, very thorough brief. I love this story. Early in Jocko Willink's career, he has to go give a speech or a presentation in front of a group of Navy SEALs. They call it a brief in the Navy SEALs. He's conducting a briefing. So he gives the brief. And when it's over, he's called into the commander's office. And the commander said, that will be the last bad brief you ever give. If you do another one like that, you're out of the SEALs. And so Jocko Willink was pretty humiliated and humbled. He thought he had done a thorough job of preparation. He thought he was ready to give that brief. But then the commander told him what he did wrong, how he had not prepared in the right way, gave him the tips that he needed so that his next brief and all of his other briefs were more thorough, more comprehensive, more correct, more what was needed. Now, lots of lessons there. You need a correcting coach. You need to keep getting better. And I don't know if I've got time to tell this story in full, but at this point, I tell a story from my personal life. I had a master's degree from Pepperdine, had a good solid 3.7 grade point average. I knew how to write an A paper in my master's program. I started a PhD program at the University of Southern California. First semester, the teacher was a legendary, difficult teacher, but a brilliant man. I turned in my first paper. No marks on it. He handed it to me and said, "Come to my office." In the office, I'm not exaggerating, he cussed me out. He said, with words that I won't repeat, "Who is it that told you you were capable of graduate work at this level?" I was humiliated, but he knew what he was doing. He then told me the difference between a master's level paper and one of research at this level. It was breathtaking. I got better and finished my classwork. Alas, never did my dissertation with a grade point average of over 3.5. He taught me what I did wrong, and he taught me how to do it right. That's what a leader does. Okay, I don't have time to tell these other stories about poorly trained, poorly equipped Iraqi troops and the competing division leaders. I'll just quickly say they were hired by a company, and there were two people up for a promotion, and they were each people were choosing sides, and they said, you can't have people choosing sides. And so they chose for the leader to replace the departing leader. They chose someone that was unexpected, that had not created division. That was significant. And then the bank branches and the inconsistent span of control, simple teaching. You can only actually lead maybe 8 to 12 people. After that, you need subdivisions, because the span of control does not work with more than at most 12 people. All right, turn to the front of your handout. And now we're going to do a very quick journey through some of the most important highlighted passages. On the front, after all, there can be no leadership where there is no team. Why is this book worth our time? It is an utterly engaging book to read. Number two, it captures the absolute necessity of putting the successful completion and accomplishment of the mission at hand of the team above all else. Have you done the job? Commander's intent. This is what needs to happen. And number three, it reminds us that getting the basics right in the business environment requires making and sticking by the tough calls. And most of these tough calls involve people decision calls. All right, turn to page 2. Now, this is done so many years ago that the little numbers at the end of each paragraph are Kindle app location numbers. These days, I know how to get the page number that would be the equivalent in the physical book, but I read these books on my Kindle app. I'm not going to read anywhere near all of these, but I'm going to read a bunch. Here we go. Number 1. As SEALs, we operate as a team of high-caliber, multi-talented individuals who have been through perhaps the toughest military training and most rigorous screening process anywhere. In the SEAL program, it is all about the team. The sum is far greater than the parts. We refer to our professional warfare community simply as the teams. We call ourselves team guys. After all, there can be no leadership where there is no team. And let me just comment and say that in the book, you learn that they are fiercely loyal to their SEAL team. They believe their SEAL team is better than the other SEAL teams. But if somebody attacks any SEAL team, they come to the defense. So it's a team of teams, to quote a different book. All right, number 5. We learned that leadership, by the way, when you see something bold, that's my emphasis. Number 5, we learned that leadership requires belief in the mission and unyielding perseverance to achieve victory, particularly when doubters question whether victory is even possible. Number 6, the only meaningful measure for a leader is whether the team succeeds or fails. I know there are people from across the country on this webinar. Let me just tell you that at the moment, the Dallas Cowboys are devoid of leadership. They are worse than bad. And it's a failure of leadership from the very top to the top, even down to the team leaders themselves. And so that's really a blunt statement. The only meaningful measure for leader is whether the team succeeds or fails. Somebody is needing the handout. If somebody can put it back in the chat, please. Okay. All right. Number 8, by leadership, we do not mean just the senior commanders of the top, but the crucial leaders at every level of the team. The senior enlisted leaders, the fire team leaders in charge of 4 people, the squad leaders in charge of 8, and the junior petty officers that stepped up, took charge, and led. Every leader matters. All right, turn to page 3. Turn to page 3. The handout is now in the chat. Thank you. Number 10, we encourage leaders to do the things they know they probably should be doing, but aren't. There are very few books that actually teach something new. There are some, especially with technology and some of the new findings in psychological safety and mindset. But in general, many books repeat what you could have read in a different book. But you know what? We forget the basics. We don't live up to the call. So that's the idea. Number 12, I'm now having to move much more rapidly. Principle on any team and any organization. All responsibility for success and failure rests with the leader. The leader must own everything in his or her world. Now, what do you do when you have a team member who is not up to the task? Put a star beside number 13. If an individual on the team is not performing at the level required for the team to succeed, the leader must train and mentor that underperformer. But if that underperformer continually fails to meet standards, then a leader who exercises extreme ownership must be loyal to the team and loyal to the mission above any individual. If underperformers cannot improve, the leader must make the tough call to terminate them and hire others who can get the job done. It is on the leader. That paragraph is profoundly important. If somebody is underperforming, get them up to speed. And if they can't do it, put in the time to help them. But if they can't do it, you're now hurting the team. Replace that person. There is no alternative to that. All right. Number 17, look at the bold part. When a bad SEAL leader walked into a debrief and blamed everyone else, that attitude was picked up by subordinates and team members who then blamed everybody else, who then followed suit. They all blamed everyone else, and inevitably the team was ineffective and unable to properly execute a plan. I skipped this, but jump up to number 11. I assembled the list of everything that everyone had done wrong. There was only one person to blame for everything that had gone wrong on the operation: me. So that's what he means by extreme ownership. All right, turn to page 4, page 4. This is the quote of the book, number 21. When leaders who epitomize extreme ownership drive their teams to achieve a higher standard of performance, They must recognize that when it comes to standards as a leader, it's not what you preach, it's what you tolerate. Put 4 or 5 stars beside that. You get what you tolerate. Boy, that is a principle that is true as can be. All right. Number 28, principle. In order to convince and inspire others to follow and accomplish a mission, a leader must be a true believer in the mission. You have to believe in what you're doing. All right. There's a story where a person needed to go to a CEO in a company and tell her, it was a woman this time, something she was doing that was hurting the company. Look at number 32. People talk about leadership requiring courage. This is exactly one of those situations. It takes courage to go to the CEO's office, knock on her door, and explain that you don't understand the strategy behind her decision. Okay, let me encourage you now. We're down to about 4 minutes from when I need to end this. Read especially all of the bold excerpts. Those are the bold highlighted passages. But there's one more that I have to read, and so let me find it. Hold on. Oh, here we go. All right, there are 2. They're on page 7. Look at number 62 on page 7. There is no 100% right solution. The picture is never complete. We want the solution to the problem. And there's too much complexity. You probably all know the acronym VUCA, VUCA, volatility, uncertainty, complexity, ambiguity. That also came out of our military in the General's College. All right. We have a complex era, and one solution may not work just right. So we've got to know there's more than one solution. The picture is never complete. By the way, Stanley McChrystal in one of his books said, I'm a trained engineer to believe in the one right solution, and it was a shock to my system to discover there is no one right solution. And then number 67, they actually wrote a follow-up book called The Dichotomy of Leadership. It's a good book, not as good as this one. Listen to this, number 67. A good leader must be confident, but not cocky. Circle that. Courageous, but not foolhardy. Competitive, but a gracious loser. Attentive to details, but obsessed by them. Not obsessed by them. Strong, but have endurance. A leader and a follower. Humble, but not passive. Aggressive, but not overbearing. Quiet, but not silent. Calm, but not robotic. Logical, but not devoid of emotions. And then close with the troops, and I'll let you read that on your own. At the bottom, a good leader has nothing to prove, but everything to prove. All right, turn to page 8. At the bottom of this page, extreme ownership. Number 1, leaders do not blame the team for mistakes and failures. They take it upon themselves. Number 2, leaders instill belief in winning in the team members, one and all. And number 3, leaders take the most difficult job on the boat, and they set the example and model. Turn to the next page, page 9. And at the bottom, I've got 8 lessons and takeaways. First, you got to know what you're doing. So what is the mission, the commander's intent, and what looks like it's effective? Number 2, it is on the leader It's the leader's job. Number 3, extreme ownership. Everyone believes in the why, understands the why, and then pursues the what. But beginning with the leader, everyone owns it all. It is extreme ownership. Number 4, get rid of the undermining, not carrying the load underperformer. Number 5, get very good at information sharing. I wish I had time to tell you the story in the book from when one group kept information from another group. Don't do that. Number 6, simplify. Keep it simple, not simplistic, but simple. Number 7, communicate thoroughly up and down and all around, making sure that it is sent well and you have not communicated until it has been received and acted on. And number 8, this is critical. I'm a minute over, but prioritize and execute. You put that with another idea of the way they go one step at a time. Picture, you've seen it in the movies, a person with a gun pointed forward, 2 guys pointed sideways, 1 guy pointed back. They clear the area, make sure it's safe, and they take 1 more step. They're looking forward, sideways, and back. And when you have 15 things to do in a battle that can happen, you decide on the first thing to do, your priority, and then you execute on that, and then you go to the second one. Well, that's the book, Extreme Ownership, How U.S. Navy SEALs Lead and Win. I'm putting my headphones back on, and I'm turning it back over to Krissa. Krissa, back to you.
Perfect. Thank you so much again, Randy. Every single time I hear an executive book briefing, I learn something new. And so I just want to say we appreciate you so much, SGR does, and I know our audience does as well. We did get a good question, and I'll ask it quickly because I know we only have a few minutes left. But how does this relate? This is the question, sorry. How does this relate to my digital transformation team I'm putting together? How do I lead making my team believe in themselves as best, yet I need to be respectful of other good or less good teams in the organization?
Okay, that's not an easy question to answer. Let me take a stab at some thoughts. I'm wondering, let's see, I don't know how to pronounce the full name, but is this a remote team or a physical team? Could you put that in the chat real quick and tell me if that is a remote team or a physical team? It's a combination. Okay. The first thing I want to say is that the more times you can get together physically, the more times you can get together physically, the better chance you have of building some kind of team spirit. The French call that esprit de corps. You got to know each other. You got to know who likes soccer and who likes baseball and who likes quilting and who likes this and who likes that. And you ought to interact as human beings. So what's happening good in your life? You want to do all of that. And then you want to be crystal clear on what it is you're trying to accomplish. I presented the book called Digital Transformation by, I think it's Siebel. It's a good book. And there are lots of books dealing with the digital transformation era. But then the last part of your question is the tough one. How can we be respectful of other good or less good teams in the organization? Here's a simple thing to do. Go out of your way to find something to praise and then do it verbally or in some kind of message all the time. Speak well of people and build them up. And so don't be arrogant, be a bigger team player. That's a tough thing. And yet, you have to know that your team is pushing for this mission, and if the other people around aren't with you yet, you still have to go forward. So it's a terrific question, and the fact that you asked it this way tells me you're on the right track. So that's my answer, Krista.
I like that answer. It's kind of, I think it might be one of those, Randy, where the fact that you're thinking about it means that you're doing the right thing, even.
Yeah. Yeah.
Well, I'm going to ask one more time. We're pretty much out of time, but wanted to make sure I don't miss any questions. I don't see any others in the chat. If you had to step away or want to rewatch the book briefing, it is available on our YouTube channel. You can go to the SGR YouTube channel and you'll see it there. But I hope you all join us again next week for another timeout. Yes.
All right. Next month for this book briefing webinar, if you're not aware of Malcolm Gladwell, he wrote The Tipping Point, Outliers. That's where he popularized the 10,000 hour rule, Blink, David and Goliath. He's got a brand new book called The Revenge of the Tipping Point. It's kind of a perfect December read, and I'll be presenting my briefing on The Revenge of the Tipping Point on the second Wednesday of December. So
perfect. Perfect. And before then, if you want to join us next week, we're doing a Wednesday webinar on implementing servant leadership in Bloomington, Illinois. So a case study. And we'll have Tim Gleason here presenting that with us. So we hope to see you again. Thank you, Christopher, for the compliment. He said, awesome, great presentation. Thank you. And we look forward to hearing from you in the meantime. So have a great rest of your week, everyone.